She hit record and dialed up the drama because a 68-year-old man had dared to cast a line at dawn. "You're going to jail," she screamed into her phone, broadcasting her outrage to thousands. This is what happens when power-hungry nobodies let it go to their heads. They never see the fall coming. Little did she know, that old bamboo fishing rod was about to unravel her $2 million kingdom. The lake she claimed dominion over, she had no clue who truly owned it. And the police chief she demanded to show up? Let's just say the decision didn't go quite as planned. Drop a comment where you're tuning in from, because what followed might forever change how you view the clipboard-wielding tyrant in your neighborhood. My name is Walter Thompson. At 68, I thought I'd witnessed just about everything during my 3 decades in the Department of Defense. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for that morning at Silver Lake. I had only just moved into Willowbrook Estates 3 days earlier. My kitchen was still a maze of cardboard boxes. I was still adjusting to a life without Margaret. She'd passed 5 years ago, but every morning, I still reached for her photo in my wallet. I could still hear her voice. "When we retire, I want us to live by a lake. You'll fish at sunrise, and I'll watch the ducks with our grandkids." So, there I was, keeping a promise to a woman who could no longer see me fulfill it. I woke up before the sun, same as I had every day for 30 years in the service. Old habits don't fade easily, especially the ones that kept you alive in places like Belgrade, Mogadishu, and other corners of the world I still can't speak about. I brewed my coffee in a half-unpacked kitchen, black, no sugar, just the way Margaret used to tease me about. "You drink coffee like you are prepping for an extraction mission," she'd say. Out the window, Silver Lake gleamed like a glass pane under first light, and undisturbed, serene. That sight stirred something deep inside, a bittersweet blend of grief and peace only those who've loved and lost truly understand. I grabbed the old bamboo fishing rod my grandfather had handed down as the only family heirloom that made it through all those military transfers. The morning air felt like silk as I walked across the dewy grass. Birds were just beginning their morning chorus, and the scent of jasmine drifted from a nearby garden. I found a small wooden bench on the lake's edge, likely placed there by someone else who once sought quiet. Setting down my tackle box, I prepped my line with the steady hands of a man who had nowhere urgent to be and no one left to wait for him. My first cast sliced through the silence, sending ripples across the lake's perfect surface. For the next half hour, it was just me, the water, and Margaret's memory. Then, peace shattered like crystal. The sharp, staccato tap of high heels on pavement pierced the stillness. I turned and saw a woman in a tailored business suit at that hour, no less, a hair yanked back so tightly it looked painful, oversized designer sunglasses resting on her head. She held her phone high, its red recording light blinking. "Good morning, Ho family," she announced dramatically to her live audience. "I've caught someone red-handed violating community standards. This elderly man is stealing from our ecosystem." My trained eye picked up on things the average civilian wouldn't. Her trembling hands, the way she glanced around for spectators, the seasoned way she held her phone. This wasn't her first attempt at a public takedown. "Can I help you?" I asked, my tone calm and deliberate, the same one I once used to talk a bomber down in Cairo. She marched forward, heels sinking into the grass with every step. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, adjusting the phone to get both of us in the frame. "Fishing," I answered simply. "And you are?" Her face flushed beneath layers of makeup. "I'm Barbara Mitchell, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association." "And you, sir, are trespassing on HOA property." She emphasized her title like it carried the weight of a badge. "In my experience, those who flaunt authority the loudest are usually the least deserving of it." Barbara's voice rose an octave, aimed squarely at her live stream. "Did you read the bylaws? All 147 pages? Fishing is strictly prohibited in Silver Lake. This is ecological vandalism." As if fate wanted to chime in, I felt a tug on my line. Calmly, I began reeling in what felt like a decent-sized bass. Barbara screeched, "He's stealing from the lake." "I'm calling 911 right now." I saw the comments flood her screen faster than she could keep up with. From the corners of my vision, I noticed blinds parting, neighbors peeking out, drawn to the scene. I lifted the fish, a solid 2-pounder, from the water, admired it for a moment, then removed the hook and gently released it back. Catch and release. Miss Mitchell, the fish is fine. But she was already dialing, her voice climbing into hysteria. Yes, police, this is Barbara Mitchell, HOA president at Willowbrook Estates. I have a trespasser illegally harvesting fish. He's threatening me broken bar with a fishing rod. Please send someone immediately. I shook my head and began packing up, moving with the calm that had served me well in places far more dangerous than this lakeside drama. But something didn't sit right. My instincts said the ones that had saved my life more than Nancia were shouting that this was more than a petty HOA dispute. Then I heard sirens. That fast for a fishing complaint? Something was off. Barbara preened for the camera, reapplying lipstick and straightening her hair. Justice is about to be served, she declared to her followers. Keep watching. This is what happens to rule breakers in my neighborhood. The police cruiser pulled up. The engine cut, the door opened, boots hit pavement. Barbara practically buzzed with anticipation. Officer, that's the money he's been. The words froze in her throat. The moment the officer stepped into view, my heart skipped a but not out of fear. I recognized that stride, that posture. Dad? Christopher's voice sliced through the morning like a hot blade. What are you doing here? He stepped forward, his uniform immaculate, his face etched with disbelief, concern and maybe a trace of pride. Barbara's phone slipped from her hand, clattering to the pavement, still recording every second. Her mouth moved like a stunned fish. No words, just hair. I saw neighbors now stepping outside, drawn in by the unfolding spectacle. And my instincts told me one thing clearly. Barbara Mitchell had just made a catastrophic miscalculation. The silence hung thick for what felt like forever, but was likely just seconds. Christopher walked toward me, Deputy Ramirez trailing behind with an expression that looked suspiciously like he was holding back laughter. Barbara finally managed to squeak out a sentence. "There's a broken bar. This is your father?" Christopher greeted me with a brief, professional hug. "Dad, why didn't you tell me you'd already moved in?" he asked, a mix of concern and mild reproach in his voice. "I could have helped with the boxes." I shrugged, feeling oddly guilty. "You've been busy, son. I figured I'd call this weekend to have you over for dinner once I found the pots and pans." The truth was more complicated. Since Margaret's funeral, we'd barely spoken, of both of us drowning in grief in our own ways. Barbara, meanwhile, was scrambling to regain control. She snatched her phone from the ground, its screen cracked but still streaming. "Chief Thompson," she snapped, "regardless of your relationship, this man was fishing illegally on HOA property. I demand you enforce the law." Christopher turned to her with the neutral expression I'd seen him perfect over the years. "Miss Mitchell, can you show me the specific bylaw that prohibits fishing, and the documentation proving the HOA owns this lake?" Barbara's face cycled through several shades of red. "Of course I can. It's in the office. I'll email it to you. Everyone knows the HOA manages all common areas." She was lying. I'd spent 3 decades reading people, and Barbara was flashing every tale in the book. That's when Robert Bradley made his entrance, walking his golden retriever along the path. At 70, Robert moved with the quiet confidence of a man who'd spent 40 years as a real estate attorney and knew exactly how the world worked. "Morning, Walter," he said with a smile. "Glad to see you settling in." "Christopher, good to see you too. How's the family?" He paused, taking in the scene with thinly veiled amusement. "Barbara causing trouble again?" Barbara whirled on him. "This doesn't concern you, Robert." But Robert only smiled a slow, deliberate grin that would make opposing counsel squirm. "Actually, Barbara, it does concern me. I've lived here 15 years and always wondered about the lake's ownership. Funny thing about property law, it requires actual documentation, not assumptions." He turned to me. "Walter, has anyone explained the history of Silver Lake to you?" I shook my head, genuinely intrigued now. Robert's smile widened. "Silver Lake has been privately owned since 1987. It's never been HOA property." Barbara sputtered like an old engine. "That's ridiculous." I have documents, but something in her tone set my instincts on edge. She was too quick to claim proof. I'd seen it before, real people trying to bluff their way through a lie. "Forged documents don't count, Barbara," Robert said mildly. "I looked into this when you tried to ban my grandkids from feeding the ducks. The lake is owned by a company called Evergreen Holdings." He paused for dramatic effect, clearly enjoying himself, and the CEO of Evergreen Holdings was Margaret Thompson. The blood drained from my face. Margaret, my wife. My knees went weak, and the tackle box slipped from my fingers. Robert nodded sympathetically. She bought the land 30 years ago when this was still considered swamp. Everyone thought she was crazy, but she saw the potential. She developed the residential areas but kept the lake private. Filed it separately under Evergreen Holdings. When she passed, ownership transferred to you. Though I imagine the paperwork hasn't been finalized. Barbara's hands trembled around her phone. Whether it was fear or rage, I couldn't tell. This is impossible, she insisted. I've managed this community for 15 years. I have records, meeting minutes, budget allocations. She spun toward Christopher, desperation cracking through her voice. This is a conspiracy. They're trying to undermine my authority. Christopher's expression remained composed, though I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. Miss Mitchell, I think it's time we reviewed all the HOA's legal documentation. Can you provide it? Barbara backed away, voice faltering. A broken bar. I'll need time to gather everything. It's a broken bar extensive. Translation. She needed time to forge better fakes. Deputy Ramirez, who had been silently checking his tablet, looked up. Chief, Miss Mitchell has called 911-47 times this year. 17 for a suspicious walking, 12 for a aggressive gardening, and 18 for a potential fishing activities. Christopher's tone turned cold. Miss Mitchell, you do realize that misuse of emergency services is a federal offense? Barbara's bluster crumbled like dry plaster. I was protecting the community, she whispered. That's my job. But something in her eyes had shifted. The predator had just realized she might be prey. That's when Dorothy Williams stepped out of her house. At 78, she moved slowly but with clear purpose, clutching a small box like it held her soul. Barbara, she said, her voice steady, I've held my tongue for 3 years, but enough is enough. Barbara's face turned ghostly pale. Dorothy, you don't understand. Dorothy raised a hand. I understand perfectly. We were college roommates, best friends for 20 years. I've watched you transform from a kind woman into thieves. A broken bar. She held up a USB drive. 3 years of evidence. Barbara, every email, every forged receipt, every diverted payment. I kept hoping you'd come to your senses, but after what you did to the Johnsons last month, I can't stay silent. Barbara lunged for the USB, but Dorothy pulled it back. They lost their home. Barbara, 75 years old, and now they're living with their daughter, because you wanted a new Mercedes. The crowd, because of course there was a crowd, began murmuring angrily. Christopher stepped forward. Miss Williams, I'll need to see that evidence. Dorothy handed it to him. There's more, she said. Barbara Mitchell isn't even her real name. She has a daughter, Jennifer. She tried to contact her last month. Barbara blocked every call. The words landed like a thunderclap. Barbara's face twisted with rage and panic. You swore you'd never tell. Tears welled in Dorothy's eyes. That was before you became a monster. Broken bar. Catherine, or should I say, Catherine Walshaw from Michigan. Barbara Catherine stumbled back, her heel catching on the grass. You don't know what you're doing, she snarled. You don't know who's behind me. The developers, the city council. They'll destroy you all. She kicked off her heels and bolted for her car. This isn't over, Walter Thompson, she yelled as she yanked the door open. You've just declared war on forces you can't begin to imagine. She turned at the last second, flashing a manic grin and holding up her phone. Check your precious lake tomorrow morning. See what happens when you cross me. The screen showed a message just sent. Lake maintenance scheduled for dawn. Christopher was already on his radio, barking orders, but Barbara peeled out, leaving black skid marks across the pristine, HOA-approved street. I felt a chill creep down my spine. In my experience, cornered people were dangerous. And Barbara Mitchell, no, Catherine Walshaw had just shown us what she was capable of. Her usual power suit had been replaced with something even more severe. Stark lines, sharp angles, a mask of control pulled tight across her face. Standing behind her was a man I didn't recognize. Expensive suit, colder eyes. Developer? My instincts warned immediately. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, Barbara began, her voice amplified by speakers that shrieked with feedback. We are facing a crisis in our community. She clicked a button on her laptop, and my face flashed onto the projector screen it captured from several angles during our morning encounter. This man, she said, voice clipped and icy, violated 7 HOA bylaws in just 15 minutes. He trespassed on HOA property, illegally harvested protected wildlife, threatened me with a weapon, and conspired with local officials to undermine the duly elected board. The crowd stirred, some murmuring in agreement, others exchanging skeptical glances. The man behind her leaned in and whispered something. Barbara's smile sharpened. Bylaw 3.2.1, she continued, flipping through hastily assembled slides. No aquatic disturbance before 8 a.m. Bylaw 7.9.4 and no wooden implements within 50 feet of HOA property. Bylaw 12.1.7 and no sitting on common area grass without written permission. A chuckle rose from the back. Wait, we need permission to sit on the grass? Barbara's face flushed. These rules exist to preserve order and protect property values. Would you rather live in chaos? That's when the suited man stepped forward. Perhaps I should introduce myself. Brandon Hayes, Sunset Holdings. We're planning some exciting improvements for this community, but we'll need cooperation. I stood slowly. Every eye turned my way. My old instincts kicked in. Assess, analyze, act. May I speak? Barbara clutched the microphone. You have no standing here. You're not a member in good standing. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the folder Robert had given me. Actually, Miss Mitchell, I'd like to speak to my standing specifically, as the legal owner of Silver Lake. The room erupted. Barbara shrieked into the mic. Security, remove this man. But the 2 volunteer guards just looked at each other and shrugged. They lived here too. They had their own history with Barbara. I walked to the front, Christopher and Robert at my side. 30 years ago, my wife Margaret bought the land that became Willowbrook Estates. She developed the homes you now live in, but she preserved Silver Lake as private property, intended for future generations. I held up the deed. This is the original legal documentation, notarized, filed with the county. Silver Lake has never belonged to the HOA, which means every maintenance fee you've paid for the lake over the past 15 years was collected under false pretenses. Hayes stepped toward Barbara, his expression darkening. This wasn't part of the plan. A man shouted from the crowd, "Where's our money? I paid thousands." Someone else yelled, "My mother skipped her medication to pay those fees," cried an elderly man. Barbara began backing away, but Hayes grabbed her arm. "Fix this," he hissed. "These documents are fake," she shouted. "Photoshopped." "I'll have my lawyer said," but Dorothy had already moved to the laptop. "Speaking of real documents," she said smoothly, "let's take a look at the actual evidence." The screen switched. Bank records, line after line of outrageous charges. $2.3 million diverted from HOA accounts over the last decade, Dorothy said. $50,000 at Nordstrom, $30,000 at Tiffany, $100,000 blown in Vegas, all charged to the HOA card, all listed as a community improvement. She fixed her eyes on Barbara. "Remember telling me those shopping trips were for networking with other HOA leaders? I kept every receipt, even the ones you asked me to destroy." The crowd erupted. Someone sobbed. A woman near the front shouted, "You said you'd put a lien on my house if I didn't pay the assessment. I borrowed from my grandkids' college fund." Christopher stepped forward, his police chief authority cutting through the chaos. "Everyone, please," he remained calm. His phone rang. He listened briefly, then looked at Barbara. "Miss Mitchell, or should I say Miss Walshaw, you're wanted in Michigan, embezzling $500,000 from a veterans charity." A stunned silence fell. Even Hayes took a step back, abandoning the sinking ship. Barbara laughed a high, unhinged sound. "So what? I made this place perfect. Before me, you were nobodies. I gave you rules, standards." She snatched the mic. "You want the truth? Fine. Yes. I took your money. Yes. I had partners and developers who stand to make billions here. And yes, my name is Catherine Walsh, and I'm proud of what I've built. You needed someone like me." The crowd surged forward, but Christopher and his deputies held them back. "Catherine Walsh," he said, "you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. You have the right to remain silent." But she wasn't done. She pulled out her phone, lifting it high. "Dead man switch," she screamed, revealing a countdown timer on screen. I figured this day might come. Devices under the lake dam will go off in 60 seconds. Silver Lake will be a mud pit. 58A broken bar, 57A broken bar. The crowd panicked. People screamed, bolted for the doors. Christopher lunged, but she hurled the phone into the crowd. 50 seconds. Better run. She cackled. But I didn't move. Something felt off. I squinted at the screen. It's a fake, I said. Just a timer app, not connected to anything. The countdown hit 0. Nothing happened. Barbara's expression collapsed. It was supposed to work. Hayes promised a broken bar, but Hayes was gone. FBI agents swept into the room. Catherine Walsh, one, announced, "You're now in federal custody." As they led her away, she screamed, "You'll pay for this, Walter. I'll poison your precious lake. I'll destroy everything Margaret loved." Barbara hurled a rock at me. My reflexes, dulled by age but honed through decades of dodging worse than rocks, weren't quite quick enough. The stone struck my forehead, and blood streamed down my face almost instantly. The cameras caught every momentum I stumble. The Crimson Streaka and Christopher caught me before I hit the ground. Through the haze, I saw Barbara's face twisted in vindictive satisfaction. "Barbara Mitchell," Christopher declared as deputies moved in to cuff her. "You're under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon and environmental terrorism." She let out a maniacal laugh. "Worth it. Do you hear me?" It was worth it to see him bleed. As paramedics cleaned the blood from my face, a man in a tailored suit approached. Brandon Hayes, the developer Robert had warned me about, stood flanked by 2 bodyguards like a cliché copyright villain from a B-movie. "Mr. Thompson," he said, voice smooth and cold. "Unfortunate about your accident. Perhaps it's time to consider selling the lake to someone better suited to manage it. Accidents tend to happen to stubborn old men who don't know when to quit." I read him instantly. Narcissist, possibly sociopath, definitely dangerous. Christopher stepped between us. That sounded like a threat. Hayes smirked, just observing the realities of Florida real estate. "Chief, first rock's a broken bar, who knows what's next? Maybe your father slips and falls. Maybe his house catches fire. These old places are very unpredictable." I met his gaze without flinching. "Belgrade. 1991. I faced down worse than you. They had guns and government support. You've got money and empty threats." His smirk twitched. He hadn't expected pushback. That night, I activated every security protocol I'd learned in 30 years of federal work: motion sensors, cameras, panic buttons. My home became a fortress. But I didn't stop there. I laid traps, as psychological ones. At midnight, 3 masked men showed up with gas cans. They found signs. "Smile. You're on FBI camera. This home protected by Smith Wesson. Survivors will be prosecuted." They froze, confused. Then, the sprinklers went off, and not water, but a bright blue dye used in bank security systems, the kind that stains for days. From my safe room, I watched them panic. Then I made a call. "Strike team is go," I said, using protocols from another life. Within minutes, an FBI SWAT team surrounded them. The blue-stained intruders surrendered immediately, looking like rejected Smurfs. One broke down crying. "Hayes paid us 50 grand, he sobbed. Said to burn the old man out or break his legs. There's a list of 12 houses to hit tonight." The dominoes fell fast. By dawn, FBI raids were underway across the state. Hayes was dragged from his mansion, screaming, "Do you know who I am? I own judges. I own cops." The agent cuffing him replied flatly, "You own nothing now." The raids dominated national news. I watched from a hospital bed, recovering from stress-induced chest pains, thankfully not a heart attack. Headlines scrolled across the screen: "Major corruption ring busted in Florida HOA scandal." Christopher sat beside me, still in uniform after a sleepless night working with federal agents. "Dad, you need rest. Doctor's orders." But I couldn't rest. Not while Margaret's lake lay poisoned and the woman behind it breathed free air. Jail cell or not, my mind was already 3 steps ahead. $2.3 million from our HOA alone. Christopher read from his tablet. Multiply that by 5 HOAs, plus kickbacks from rigged construction contracts, and we're looking at $50 million over 10 years. Hayes's phone had everything: texts arranging bribes, payments to city officials, plans to illegally evict elderly residents. He showed me a message exchange. Barbara, the old vet moved in. He owns the lake. Need him gone ASAP. Hayes, use the usual methods. If that fails, we have other options.
The community's response was immediate. Within 6 hours of the news breaking, a clean-up fundraiser for Silver Lake hit $500,000. Environmental groups donated gear. Volunteers arrived with boats and nets. #Save Silver Lake trended across social media. That same day, the Margaret Thompson Foundation was founded, dedicated to protecting Florida's waterways. Even in death, Margaret was still defending what she loved. Barbara's lawyer quit publicly, holding a press conference on the courthouse steps. "My client is indefensible," he declared. She threatened judges, jury members, even me. In 30 years of law, I've never encountered someone so devoid of remorse. Her assets were frozen by federal order. The woman who'd once lived in luxury on stolen funds now had to rely on a terrified public defender who looked fresh out of law school. There was poetry in that. 3 days later, I checked myself out of the hospital against medical advice. "I'm going to that trial," I told Christopher when he tried to stop me. "Dad, you need to rest," he started, but I silenced him with the look I'd once used to prevent wars. "Your mother spent 30 years building dreams around that lake. Barbara tried to destroy it out of spite. Some fights you don't walk away from. This is for Margaret, for our community, for everyone that woman hurt. I will look her in the eyes when justice comes." He didn't argue. He knew better. The evidence against Barbara was staggering. Over 10,000 documents seized, 50 hours of secret recordings Dorothy had made over 3 years, revealing a woman consumed by greed. In one recording, Barbara sneered, "These idiots pay their fees like clockwork, a sheep to slaughter. Every special assessment, every fine, every late fee, it all makes me rich. They deserve it for being stupid." In another, she laughed about evicting an elderly couple. "They cried when they left. 60 years in that house and I took it for a $300 unpaid fine." Even the FBI agents were disgusted. The environmental damage to Silver Lake was extensive but not irreversible. Marine biologists worked around the clock, introducing beneficial bacteria and filtration systems. Over 3,000 dead fish were removed, including endangered species, each one added to Barbara's charges. Environmental terrorism alone carried a 25-year sentence, with the added charges of assault, fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. Barbara was facing up to 200 years in prison. No plea deal would save her. But what the investigation uncovered was even darker. Barbara and Hayes hadn't just stolen money, they'd stolen lives. The Johnsons and the elderly couple Barbara had mocked both died of stress-induced heart attacks within 6 months of losing their home. 3 other seniors died shortly after similar evictions. Not legally murder, but morally, she may as well have pulled the trigger. In my world, we called people like her soft killers, the kind who destroyed lives without ever firing a shot. Christopher held a press conference on the courthouse steps, the spitting image of the leader his mother always believed he'd become. "Corruption ends today in Willowbrook," he declared. "My father stood up to organized crime and survived. He's not a victim, or he's a hero, and we will protect our citizens from anyone who tries to exploit them." The crowd erupted. Someone started chanting justice for Walter, and soon hundreds of voices joined in. I had just wanted to fish in peace. Somehow, I'd become the face of a movement. Margaret would have found that hilarious. The courthouse overflowed on the day of Barbara's trial. 500 people packed into a space meant for 200. Fire marshals hovered nervously. National media circled like vultures. I sat in my wheelchair, a concession to my doctor, wearing my best suit, the one I wore to Margaret's funeral. It felt right. Barbara shuffled in, shackled at wrists and ankles, her orange jumpsuit a far cry from her usual designer outfits. Her hair, once perfectly styled, now showed gray roots. Her face was bare, stripped of the heavy makeup she'd always used to mask the rot beneath. But her eyes still blazed with hatred. When she saw me, she mouthed, "You're dead." Judge Patricia Henderson, an old friend of Margaret's, had refused to recuse herself. "I knew Margaret Thompson," she said, "and I know the law. The defendant will get a fair trial, though looking at these charges, I doubt fairness will help her much." She eyed the 47-page indictment with barely concealed disgust. "In 30 years on the bench, I've never seen anything like this. Environmental terrorism, assault with a deadly weapon, fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, racketeering. Miss Walsh, how do you plead? My assessment of the judge: tough, fair, and the kind Margaret would have respected. Barbara stood, her chains rattling. Barbara rattled her chains, shouting, "Not guilty. This is persecution. I am being railroaded by a conspiracy." The judge sighed. "Ma'am, do you have representation?" A young public defender began to rise, but Barbara waved him off. "I'll represent myself. I know the law better than any of these fools." The prosecutor actually smiled at that. Leaning forward, the judge warned, "Miss Walsh, defending yourself in a case of this magnitude is highly inadvisable. You're facing potential life imprisonment." Barbara laughed. "I ran an HOA for 15 years. I know everything about rules and regulations." Someone in the gallery muttered, "That's not the same thing," and nervous laughter rippled through the courtroom. Even I had to suppress a smile. The prosecution's case was brutal. 147 slides of damning evidence, videos played on courtroom screens showing Barbara poisoning the lake, dead fish floating like silent accusations. Bank records revealed systematic theft stretching back a decade. The prosecutor, a seasoned veteran who had taken down mob bosses, looked almost bored by how easy it was. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, "the defendant hasn't just stolen money. She's destroyed lives, poisoned the environment, and shown no remorse. She is, quite simply, a danger to society who must be removed from it." He displayed a photo of the lake before and after Barbara's sabotage. The jury gasped. Dorothy took the stand next, clutching a handkerchief. "Barbara and I were best friends for 20 years, she began, voice trembling. "I watched her change from a caring person into a monster, consumed by greed and power." She played an audio recording from a Christmas party 3 years earlier. Barbara's voice filled the courtroom. "These idiots paid for my Bentley, my yacht, my condo in Aspen. Every fake fine, every made-up fee straight into my accounts. Democracy? Please. I am the law here. They're sheep. I'm the wolf. It's nature. Baby." The jury looked horrified. One woman wiped away tears. "This wasn't just crime, it was cruelty refined to an art." When it was my turn, Christopher wheeled me to the stand. I spoke steadily despite the bandage still on my forehead. "I just wanted to fish in the place my wife dreamed of retiring." Miss Walsh turned paradise into hell for hundreds of families. "But this isn't about revenge. It's about justice for every senior citizen she robbed, every dream she shattered for profit." Barbara suddenly screamed, "You stole my lake." I met her eyes and calmly replied, in the same voice I once used to defuse a hostage situation, "It was never yours, Miss Walsh. It belonged to my wife, and she wanted it preserved for everyone." Barbara stood, her shackles clanking. "I hate you. I hate your dead wife. I hate this whole place." She tried to lunge at me but was restrained by bailiffs. The courtroom was stunned into silence. That's when Jennifer Mitchell entered the room. Barbara froze mid-scream. "Jennifer," she whispered. Her daughter, whom she hadn't seen in 15 years, stepped up to the witness stand. "Hello, Mother, or should I say, Catherine. I've come to testify for the prosecution." The courtroom fell deathly silent. You could hear Barbara's ragged breathing. Jennifer's testimony was crushing. "She chose power over her own children," Jennifer said, tears streaming. "She kicked me out at 16 for questioning her methods. Told me I was weak like my father. I've watched her hurt hundreds of people from afar. She's not sick. She's not misunderstood. She's evil. The woman I knew died long ago. What's left is just a monster wearing her face." Barbara shrieked like a wounded animal. "Traitor, I gave you life, you owe me everything." The judge had to call a recess to restore order. "In my experience, when your own family turns against you in court, the verdict is already written." Barbara's defense was pitiful. She showed pictures of manicured lawns and clean streets, shouting about her vision. "I created paradise," she shrieked. "These ungrateful people lived in beauty because of me. Every rule, every fine, it was all for their benefit. They should be thanking me, building statues in my honor." She turned to the jury, eyes wild. "Don't you see, I'm a visionary. I took chaos and made order. I am a god." The jury forewoman actually laughed it up and quickly covered her mouth, embarrassed. The judge didn't even reprimand her. When defendants start comparing themselves to deities, insanity pleas often follow. But Barbara was far too narcissistic to take that escape route. The jury deliberated for just 37 minutes. When they returned, the four women stood tall. On all 137 counts, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted with cheers and applause. The judge banged her gavel repeatedly. Order. I will have order. Turning to Barbara and all pale beneath her graying roots, the judge read the sentence. Catherine Walsh, you are hereby sentenced to 35 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. You will pay $5 million in restitution to your victims and are permanently banned from serving on any homeowners association in the United States. It was the whole band that finally broke her. Her final meltdown was nothing short of theatrical. I'll kill you all, she screamed, lunging toward me. Especially you, Walter, and your dead wife. I'll dig her up. And the bailiffs tackled her before she could finish the threat. As they dragged her away, she screamed obscenities and promises of revenge from beyond the grave. My lake, my kingdom, you stole my life. The last thing we heard before the doors slammed shut was her voice echoing promises of vengeance. The courtroom slowly emptied of people hugging, crying, finally free. I stood from my wheelchair. I'd been feeling better for weeks, but I'd kept using it for sympathy. Christopher hugged me tight. It's over, Dad. I looked toward the direction of Silver Lake, visible through the courthouse window. No, son. Now the healing begins. We have a lake to restore and a community to rebuild. You're not responsible for her choices, I told Jennifer gently, but you can choose a different path. I offered her my spare fishing rod. Ever been fishing? She shook her head, tears already welling. She said fishing was for lazy people who didn't value productivity. Over the next hour, I taught her the basics of how to bait a hook, how to cast, and most importantly, how to wait. To let life come to you instead of always trying to control it. It was like teaching someone how to breathe again. When Jennifer caught her first fish, a small bass, no bigger than her hand, as she broke down in sobs. I've never felt this peaceful, she whispered. Is this what normal families do? Just sit together and enjoy nature? I helped her release the fish gently back into the water, watching it swim away free and unburdened. This is what healing looks like, I told her. Your mother never understood that trying to control everything only robs you of joy. Don't repeat her mistake. Jennifer became a regular at the fishing club, slowly learning to relax, to laugh, to be part of a community rather than rule over one. The sins of the mother didn't have to be the fate of the daughter. The transformation of Willowbrook became a model for communities across the country suffering under the weight of tyrannical HOAs. Property values rose 40% when people realized they could enjoy their homes without living in fear of arbitrary fines. Crime plummeted. Turns out, when neighbors talk to each other, they look out for each other too. We began hosting seminars on democratic governance, teaching other neighborhoods how to avoid the trap of concentrated power. The media dubbed it the Willowbrook miracle, but it wasn't a miracle. It was simply what happens when good people stand up and say, enough. The wider corruption network collapsed like a row of dominoes. 27 individuals were convicted, with prison sentences totaling over 300 years. More than $200 million in stolen assets were recovered and returned to victims across 5 states. Brandon Hayes got 20 years and cooperated fully. His testimony reached all the way up to state government. The Florida HOA Reform Act, informally known as Frank's Law, passed the state Senate 79-21. It criminalized abuse of HOA positions for personal gain and mandated full financial transparency. Margaret would have been proud to see her lake spark such meaningful change. Barbara watched it all from a prison cell, growing grayer and more bitter with each passing day. Her appeals were denied, her lawsuits were dismissed, and eventually, she was forced to face the truth. Her empire was gone forever. The woman who once wore designer suits now wore prison gray. 5-star meals were replaced with institutional food. She drooled through fear. Now she lived in it, surrounded by inmates who knew exactly who she was and what she had done. Poetic justice. I received letters from fellow inmates, describing how she still tried to control the little things: at TV remotes, meal lines, even the library checkout system. Old habits die hard, even behind bars. 1 year after our first confrontation, the entire community gathered at Silver Lake to celebrate. Over 500 people came out to fish, picnic, and reflect on how far we had come. I stood up to speak, gazing out at a sea of familiar faces as strangers who had become friends. A year ago, all I wanted was to fish in peace, I began, but I found something bigger: a community held hostage by greed and fear. And we learned that evil only thrives when good people stay silent. Margaret always believed kindness could change the world, and she was right. But sometimes kindness needs to be paired with courage. Sometimes protecting paradise means fighting those who would destroy it. I raised my fishing rod in tribute to Margaret Thompson, who preserved this lake for all of us; to Dorothy Williams, who found the strength to speak truth to power; to every person who stood up and said no more; and yes, even to Barbara Michello for reminding us that vigilance matters. As the sun set over Silver Lake, turning the water golden crimson, 500 voices cheered in celebration. Children fed ducks where once it had been forbidden. Elderly couples strolled hand in hand where permits had once been required. Teenagers cast fishing lines where it had once been illegal. This was what victory looked like, in not just the absence of tyranny, but the presence of joy. And somewhere, in a cold prison cell, a gray-haired woman sat alone, finally understanding, power seized through fear is no power at all. The lake she tried to destroy would outlive her by centuries, a proof that love, in the end, always conquers hate.